My name is Joe Heskey. I am the VP of Sales and Marketing for Warwick. And I want to sincerely thank everyone that registered and everyone that braved the weather to be here today, because I know that it was tough getting here. I drove up from Kent, and it took me all over an hour to get here, which normally would have been about 35 minutes. So, again, thank you very much. So do we have any Warwick customers that came into this morning? All right. Good. Oh, wow. There we go. Yay. Well, I know that a lot of you may think that Warwick is a voice solutions integrator, and that's true. We are. We've been doing this for over 70 years. But what we need to let everyone know is that we've also been doing data services for close to 10 years as well. So we want to take today to kind of give you a more holistic view of what cybersecurity is all about. We want to make sure that you understand that there's a during and there's a before and a during and after to what is involved with providing a good cybersecurity solution. So we think we've assembled a pretty good cast of characters today to give you that view. One thing I do want to say is that we have a panel discussion scheduled for the end of everything. So if you can hold your questions until the end, as the presenters go through their presentations and you feel like there's something that you want to ask, write it down. And then once we get to that point into the presentation, then you guys can ask away. One of the things that we want to make sure that you understand, at the end of the presentation, is that cybersecurity isn't just about firewalls and antivirus. There's a lot more that goes into that. And, if you think about locking your front door, but maybe leaving your windows open. And, that's just kind of an analogy, but if you think about it, there's a lot that can go on behind the scenes that you don't even know about. Your environment could be breached, and you may not even realize it for months, right? That would be equivalent to maybe having someone break into your home, hide in a closet, take some things when you're not around, and then you finally realize, wait a minute, there's stuff missing. Holy crap. So, right? So, again, what we hope to achieve today, our main goal is that you understand more about what's involved in a cybersecurity solution from tip to tail, beyond just the devices that sit on someone's network. And you leave here today with a better understanding of that than you came in with. So with that said, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Mike Johnson. He is our Director of IT Services at Warwick, also known as our Chief Problem Solver. Mike?
Thank you, Joe. Again, thank you all for coming out today. One of the things when we think about cybersecurity, even at Warwick, that landscape is changing all the time. I'm sure you guys are aware of it. We're aware of it as well, and so we've had to adjust, much like the industry has and everyone involved in it. So over the last year, we've looked at our offering and how do we support our customers or our clients in this capacity. Because as an MSP, just the general idea or onus of the network falls on us, whether it's right or wrong, or it's contracted or non-contracted. If we're providing IT support for you, you rely on us for security. It's just the way it goes. So we've had to adjust as well. How many of you have had a security event or incident over the last year that you're aware of? Anyone? What kind of event was it?
We got breached at all of our locations by our technical support company. Actually got breached, but we were forward-facing to the consumer, so it was on us.
Good. And how long did it take you to discover that?
It was brought to my attention about a week or so after, well, it got loaded on about 2 months before I was aware that there potentially was a breach. Then it was another month before it was confirmed that there was a breach.
So it's to Joe's point, they can be hanging out, and typically they'll do that. They'll do some recon, and then they'll figure out how to do the exploit, and then they'll take action on that. We see a lot of that in various levels, whether it's ransomware, whether it's a rogue user potentially, in all flavors. And so we've had to adjust our offering. And the core, we have 3 offerings. There's a pamphlet in the back if you're interested in them. But they all start with a layer of security. So what we do on all of our engagements and then ongoing is we assess the network. And we don't just throw in an agent and just say, all right, here, you can call us for support. We inventory your network and look at your assets, because there's probably a lot more assets on your network than anyone is aware of, or management might be aware of, that are potential access points for threats or vulnerabilities. So after we inventory your network and we look at those assets, we sit down with you and say, all right, let's classify these assets. Are these high value, middle value, low value? And then we look at the vulnerabilities against those assets. And then we create a plan, typically a layered approach. It could be, as minimal as like a 3-layer, up to a 7-layer approach, depending on what works for you and your business and your users. Because anytime you work with security, you have to work with usability versus protection, right? Risk management. You can have a really locked down environment, right? But no one can use it. Or you can have a really flexible one where everyone's an administrator of their own machine, and then it's really usable, but it's really usable for everyone, including hackers. So we not only have revamped our product offering, but one of my jobs is to look at what are the market leading technologies and who are those people that provide those. And then we build our service offering around those. We have some of those partners here today. Ryan is a security consulting expert. We partner with him to provide a certain part of our overall feature set or security set, and he will go through some doomsday stuff for you.
Doomsday.
All right.
I appreciate it, Mike. So again, thank you for coming out today. I have about 35 minutes, and in that time, unfortunately, I can't cure all of your cybersecurity woes. We are going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are out there, maybe taking a different look at cybersecurity and what you're doing today, and also a few tidbits on how you can better protect yourself right out of the gate. So I don't know if anyone in this room has come to a presentation like this. Maybe they've gone on a webinar, been on the internet, and things start off with something like this, right? Cyber attacks, the headlines, Target, Equifax, Sony, and they hit you with all these doomsday events. Perhaps they put up a great infographic, and you can see that 50% of incidents come from employees clicking on something they shouldn't have. 93% of phishing emails are pushing ransomware. So it's pretty graphic that has a ton of data. Very good data. It's actionable data. The problem is it creates a bit of numbness, right? We get bombarded by it all the time. And what I want to make sure that we're doing today is not confusing that numbness with really your threshold for risk. So let's take a step back and let's look at how all of those events, how those numbers really apply to your business. So you can see this is kind of funny, but when we're talking about risk in a business sense, right, there's going to be some sort of financial impact. If we're talking about risk in life, there's going to be some sort of impact to your life. And we know that everyone falls somewhere on this threshold or this gamut of risk. Some people are willing to leave their keys in their car and leave it unlocked at an airport, right? Some are going to wear life jackets on a boat, and some are even going to seek out the for places that you can pay to swim with great white sharks, right? They're all varying levels of risk. And this really applies to your business as well, right? What do you want to be protected against? How far do you want to go? So when we touch on how data breaches occur, it's a little bit complex, but if we break down just a few steps, and Mike had touched on them, we see that the bad guys want to gain access to your system, right? And they do it various types of ways, through exploits, phishing, right? They're deploying software that allows them to have remote access, right? And then once they're established, they want to sit in your environment. The average dwell time that a bad guy, once they're in your environment, is actually 284 days. The numbers will vary a bit, but that's a pretty average number. So a dwell time, like Joe had mentioned, is when someone is in your house, so to speak, and you don't even know it. So think about that, right? Someone is in your network. They have access to your data, your logins, perhaps your client information. So it's a very scary concept. And what they're doing while they're in there is they're looking to see what's going on, right? What transactions are going on? They're going to deploy other software so that if you detect how they got in and you close down that gap, they're going to have a backup plan, right? So they're doing a lot of damage in that time, but they're really, for the most part, trying to stay undetected, right? Because the more they can learn, the bigger the payout's going to be when we get down to this last piece, when they do harm, right? And that could be where they ransom your data. We've all heard about ransomware. Your system gets locked down. You can't access any of your files. That's a kind of a smash and grab approach, but very effective. They may want to leverage your resources. They may want to use your computers to do their own transactions. Maybe they want to steal data. Maybe it's valuable to them, or it can be resold in the black market. So let's take a look at two examples that have been in the news. Give you an opportunity. Has there been anything in the news lately as far as the enterprise or big companies that you've seen related to cybersecurity? One of them, very large, probably affected just about everyone in this room. You can yell it out. Equifax, yeah, that's a very good one. So I want to talk about Equifax and Target real quick, and I want to tie it back to the last slide, how breaches occur. I don't want to be the doomsday slide that I showed in the beginning and kind of made light of. What we want to do is understand that everyone is at risk, and the way the Enterprise and Target were breached was really pretty simple. In the case of Equifax, and you'll probably become even more angry if you didn't realize this, they were exploited because they didn't apply a patch to their web application server. They knew about this patch for about 2 months, and all they had to do was update. But that created a vulnerability, an exploitable path for the bad guys to gain access to the system. So while that was at the enterprise level, you can think about how this applies to your desktops, to your phones, to your servers, right? It's not a movie scene. It's not someone going to town. It's an identifiable, exploitable path. In the case of Target, many of you may have systems that you're connected to or that others are connected to you in the opposite order. So for Target, they were hacked, not necessarily by a targeted attack, but their HVAC vendor had access to their network so that they could service their HVAC, right, which was on the network. Target wasn't necessarily hacked. The HVAC company was hacked. They were targeted, right? And then they were able to gain access to Target while they waited in that dwell time, and they collected information. Right? So it's very real, and you can apply that from the enterprise all the way down to your personal life. Those same sort of exploits apply to your computer at home as well. So we hear oftentimes that SMBs, right? We have nothing worth taking. However, we know that that's not the reality. The information that you have is valuable to cyber criminals. They're going to be looking at, right, a theft of funds, ransoming your data, or stealing sensitive information. They can use that for gain, right? So you are a target. We hear that attacker groups won't waste their time on SMB targets specifically. Again, in reality, most attacks aren't targeted. If any of you have ever done sales, right, you look at a funnel. The bigger the funnel is at the top and feeds down, the likelihood your close rate's going to increase. Well, it's the same idea here. Phishing, emails. You can send out millions of emails. Let's cast a wide net. Let's see what happens. Let's see what comes back in, right? And a phishing email that gets hit might be someone at your company, or it could be someone at another company. They're going to exploit vulnerabilities. So we talked about patches as a very simple example. A lot of you may have systems that are no longer supported and you have to run legacy operating systems, or that software is no longer being updated, right? Those are vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So you want to think about, work with a managed service provider to at very least isolate those sort of systems if they don't have to be online. And we know that there are compromising accounts through stolen credentials, and that happens in various ways. We'll touch on a few of those a little bit later in the presentation. So what I want to do is have a kind of a fun little video. Has anyone ever seen ransomware being deployed by chance, or has anyone ever gotten a phishing email that they know of? We got a couple of hands. So I want to run through this video. Unfortunately, my back will be turned to you, but I want to narrate as we go along. Oh, there we go. So what we can see here is that an email came in from the United States Postal Service saying you had a package, delivery had failed because you weren't home, but we've been kind enough to attach this file that has all the information that you need to track down your package. So great, I don't want to lose my Amazon package, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this attachment. Seems legitimate, everything looks good. Now, how many of you have opened up Word or Excel and you've seen this enable content at the top, right? So everyone that has it should be saying yes, because it is a standard now. Do you know what that's doing by chance? Or is it just a nuisance? It's a nuisance. So it's a protection step that Microsoft put in place to help reduce the risk of this type of attack. Because ultimately, when we click on enable content, which we know we have to do to edit this document, right, or to access the document, it's going to deploy a script. And that script acts very swiftly. So as soon as we enable content, at that point, we've already been hit by ransomware. Your files are going to be encrypted from that point moving forward, right? It's very simple and happens quite often. So the bad guys are nice enough to go as far as to say, hey, here's what happened. Here's where you go to download the browsers. Oh, you don't know what Bitcoin are? We'll show you how to buy it, and we'll show you how to give it to us. And once you do, we'll go ahead and unlock your files. If that's not customer service, I'm not really sure what is, right? So this was to, again, just to highlight how simple it is to be attacked by a phishing attempt. And in years past, right, we kind of make fun of the Nigerian prince who's stuck and needs money. That's not the case anymore for phishing. I've gotten emails from my own IT staff saying that looked like phishing attempts or that were phishing attempts. It came from the right domain. It looked like someone that I trusted because perhaps another account was breached or someone was simulating that path, right? So it looks like something trustworthy. The email said, hey, Ryan, could you enter in your credentials? We have a new great way so that you can reset your system admin logins in case you forget it. I'm like, whoa, so you're going to ask me to enter my credentials so that IT can give me the rights to reset my credentials, right? Something fishy is going on there. And if we were to go back in this email example, you'll see that it was not personalized. It said, dear customer, right? It didn't say dear John. It didn't say dear Ryan. There were typos. The domain that it came from didn't say at USPS. It had some random words. So there's some key indicators that you want to be on the lookout for. That's a very important piece in educating your staff to identify these. So the other thing that we hear oftentimes is the tools that we have in place will protect me. And in part, absolutely, that is true. There's always a foundation, right? You kind of have the basics, if you will. Unfortunately, the nature of war is constant change. Things have evolved, right? 3 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, were you seeing the headlines that you're seeing today? Right? The criminals are becoming much more intelligent, much more savvy in the way that they're going about these attacks. So because the nature of war is constant change, we need to change as well. And that's what Mike had alluded to. What we were doing a few years ago isn't going to cut it today, right? What got us here isn't going to get us there. So we see that the reality is that most attacks bypass basic security. Firewalls, 95% of ransomware get past firewalls. 66% of malware get past antivirus. and 1 in 3 phishing emails gets opened. Right, so think about that. It doesn't mean that firewalls are ineffective or you shouldn't have one or antivirus is worthless. It's a matter of things have changed, the attack vectors have changed, and how we have to line up our defense in depth has changed as well, right? The more that we can layer, the less that's going to fall through the gaps. So when you look at sort of what is standard today under current services, right? Managed IT, you're going to provide the help desk services. You're going to look at patching. You're going to do the basic IT fundamentals. Backup and recovery. I would remove backup and recovery from maybe a security offering per se, because for me, security is more preventative, but backup and disaster recovery is still paramount nonetheless, because when something does happen, right, you want to get back to an operational state. And not only do you want to back up your data, you want to have it in multiple locations. You want to be able to virtualize. You want to reduce the amount of time that you're down, right? So that's a key component of backup and recovery and business continuity overall. And then some of these foundational security services we talked about, AV, firewalls, DNS filtering. So these are all kind of that, you got your front door locked, as Joe said, but we need to expand what we're doing in our mindset. So as we move up this strategy, we want to look at threat vector protection, not just individual attacks that we want to protect ourselves against, but what's the avenue, right? Is it through the network? Is it through email? Is it through rogue Wi-Fi access points? Is it the mobile devices? Let's look at locking down the ways that the criminals get in, right? Let's start there. Let's identify where you want to protect yourself. Active risk monitoring. So part of this is really for us about looking at hardening your environment naturally. There's a lot of configuration changes that are inherent to a Windows environment, for instance. They're going to help safeguard you from attacks. Some of you may have heard of like RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, right? That's something that's very bad to have enabled out in the wild because attackers know how to gain access to that very quickly. And once they do that, they have access to your network as well. So we want to take a look at kind of hardening naturally and then the tools that are feeding into the system to identify gaps. So, if your AV isn't running, but your patches are up to date, if you recall WannaCry when that happened, you were going to be safe. But if patches weren't applied, your AV wasn't running or wasn't up to date, that system was more at risk. So part of what Warwick's able to do is correlate data from a lot of different sources and identify these gaps in your coverage and assess how big those gaps are so that they know where to take action to get them to an acceptable threshold of risk. And then lastly, looking at attack monitoring and response, this is really in large part a human component. So we're looking at key indicators of risk. So I didn't catch your name in the red shirt. You had a breach, right? So more than likely, there were indicators of risk somewhere along the line, right, that may or may not have been able to be identified. So if someone were trying to gain access to your environment, let's say under a brute force attack, that's a very straightforward approach, they're going to be trying to log into your system over and over and over. Probably not an individual, someone using a script or some other software, but an indicator of risk is, hey, someone tried to gain access to a machine 25 times and failed. I mean, that's more than a hangover morning, right? That's a really bad day. So that's a key indicator of risk. So we want to take a look at those things actively and mitigate it and say, no, this is probably harmful behavior, right? We want to isolate that machine. We want to recommend password changes. We want to take a look at why that system was accessible and get you back to a proper operational state where your overall risk has been reduced, right? So we look at a lot of different things like elevated privileges, logging in from IP addresses that are out of the country, logging in after hours. So if your employees typically end their day at 5 and you know they don't log in, someone logging in at 8, 9 o'clock at night might be an indicator of risk. We want to look at those behavioral patterns and identify where action should be taken to help mitigate further spread of harm, right? So Warwick, and Mike alluded to this in the opening, we want to help educate, our current clients. We want to help educate everyone because it's a team game, cybersecurity. So what are the objectives and impacts of cybersecurity to your business? We want to have a real discussion about where you stand today. So on that chart a few slides ago, right? Are you at the current service level? Are you looking at maybe elevating what your security posture is? So where are you today? Let's be honest about that. And we want to understand what acceptable risks are. Not everyone in this room is going to be at the same threshold of risk. Some people are going to be more willing to download bootleg versions of Word, of Photoshop, right, and install those. You're the folks that are willing to also swim with sharks, right? Actually, I would like to swim with sharks. That'd be really cool. But, right, so there's going to be all along the gamut. So what we want to do is help consult with you and say, okay, what have you seen? Who has access to your data? Let's look at the supply chain. Who's coming in? Who's going out? And let's identify what the acceptable risks are. And then let's get you from a current state and then map what that plan looks like to get you to a desired state. Maybe we get you to that desired state in a year. Maybe it's a month, 2 months, right? We want to work on that plan together because there may be several iterations of how we ultimately get there. So there, to my knowledge, have always been 3 pillars of cybersecurity. You have process, people, and technology. Up until recently, people haven't been invested in, right? The folks who are using the machines for work on a daily basis have really been a resource that I think have been neglected. I had a chance to speak with the Chief Information Security Officer of Alcoa, Pittsburgh company, and several years ago they had a huge breach. And he said, Ryan, I had a budget that would blow your mind, right? We're a multi-billion-dollar company. I had the best of the best, and I had 2 and 3 times of the best, right? All layered up. He goes, wouldn't you know that it was an individual who clicked on a phishing email that got through all of my technology? He goes, so I started to invest in people, right? So there's a reason that people are on here as one of the pillars of cybersecurity. You have to have technology. You have to have layers to start to block those risks at the network level, at the computer level. Process is paramount in knowing what has happened, how are we going to keep you in the state that you're at. If that should change, how do we get you back there? And again, training the people that you have as a layer of your security posture. Now what Warwick is able to do, and this is just a graphical representation of what I explained a few minutes ago, but we're taking these sort of things like your patches, which are a security concern, right? We want to make sure those are up to date all the time. The configurations around the users and the system, but we're also going to look at your endpoint protection, your DNS filtering. We're going to look at awareness training. So we can put you through modules. We can do simulated phishing attempts. We can see which employees clicked on those phishing emails. Give them targeted education to say, hey, you fell for this trick. Let's make sure you stay on the lookout for it next time. We can also do training around PCI and compliance. But what we're doing is we're taking all of that data and we're equating it to a risk score based on those threat vectors that you want to protect against and what your level of risk that we established is at. So we know that there are certain categories at risk, some that aren't at risk, but where do we need to take action? So at a glance, we know where you should be and where you need to go, right? So let's get you back to that good state as quickly as possible. And at the end of the day, right, when you're talking about cybersecurity, we want to first prevent. I mentioned data backup, which is very important, but ransomware, for instance, right, you can restore back to a good operational state with a backup. But what happens if the attack really was more, to pull your data out of your system? You can back up to a state where maybe the bad guys didn't have access to your system, but your data's still gone. It's still in the dark web. It's still being auctioned off. Damage has already been done. So yes, data backup is very, very critical, but we want to really focus on prevention as well. So let's stop the malware from being executed. Let's educate the users so they don't click on those phishing emails, right? They don't go to the bad sites. we talk about phishing, that's through email. You can even get texts. I got a text the other day that said, hey, check out this picture you were tagged in on Facebook. Right? That's intriguing. Oh, I wonder, why did I get a text about that? Maybe it's a buddy. You click on that, it goes to a site that looks like Facebook, just like Facebook. And it says, hey, can you log in? Sure, I'll log in. Here's my password. And then nothing happens. Like, oh, maybe it didn't take, let me log in again. That's just someone farming your information, right? Now they got you. And I would guess that most of you probably have the same password for your Gmail, your Facebook, maybe your work logins, banking, right? So now that they have one email, they have one password, they're going to try to log into all kind of places and do a lot more harm than, uploading some crazy selfies onto your Facebook page, right? So we want to detect what is happening in the environment. Like I said, let's look at those key indicators of risk. Let's try to minimize, mitigate the risk. And then we also have to have a way to remediate, because at the end of the day, you can't guarantee safety, right? I mean, you can't stop every single threat. You can't put risk at an absolute zero. So we need to make sure we have a way to remediate and get you back to a good operational state. So in summary, let's properly define risk and your thresholds. Remember that risk and a threat are not the same thing. Malware is a threat. Risk is related to a business impact, right? A financial impact. And what your thresholds are. So how far are you willing to take on risk in exchange for your company's good name, for losing data, for being out of business, for some defined period of time. Remember that everyone is a target, right? It's not just the big guys, it's not just the Targets and the Sonys. Everyone is. You individually at your house, at your business. There are no guarantees, as just mentioned, right? We can't stop everything, but we can reduce the likelihood of an event occurring. And data breaches, they aren't from a scene from a movie. It's not all 007 stuff. It's not someone in a hoodie on their computer trying to hack a system specifically. You can go out and you can buy ransomware on the internet for a couple bucks. I could buy it and email everyone in this room and see what I get out of it. Right? It's very simple. It's not that complex for the people that are doing it. And I would say most importantly, when we're talking about cybersecurity, the threat landscape has changed. We aren't where we were, right? So because of that, your security efforts should change as well. In closing, I would recommend working with Warwick, having a network assessment scheduled with them to help create a baseline, identify where those gaps are, and work together to see where you can move to from a current to a desired state. Thank you.
So my name is Paul Tuttle. I am a senior technology consultant with Warwick. Just want to say real quickly, my role within Warwick is to work with businesses, nonprofit organizations, and we have school systems, a number of other types of organizations where we provide managed IT services, essentially taking over comprehensive responsibility for IT operations within those organizations, and also augment existing IT staff. And so my role is to form partnerships with these organizations to help maximize their IT ops, create a more efficient, cost-effective way to handle the IT operations. We also have a number of other sort of ancillary services, IT business continuity plans for organizations that are looking to have a fallback plan should anything happen to the IT management that they have in place. So those are some of the types of services that we provide. I want to introduce John Hyman, who is a partner at Myers Roman. John's expertise is in the area of human resources, employment agreements, disciplinary action, including terminations. He's all about the whole area of human resources, policy and procedure, compliance with those organizations that are within a regulatory environment. And it goes back to what Ryan was just saying. You can have all the infrastructure in place, you can have the processes in place, but the statistics tell us that breaches come more often than not from people. And if you don't have the appropriate policies, procedures, and training in place, you're doomed from the start. So I want to turn it over to John, and we look forward to your presentation.
Great, thanks, Paul. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you to Warwick for hosting, and particularly for the invite to have me here today to share with you all what to me is maybe the easiest but the most important thing to do in making sure that your organization is cyber compliant, which is creating a cyber secure culture within your organization. And we're going to approach this from two different aspects. We're going to approach it from, number one, what do you do with your folks? Because as it's been said a couple times already this morning, the most likely cause of a breach is going to come not from your technology, not from your hard systems, but from your soft systems. That is, the people that interact with those systems on a daily basis. And then number two, so that's area number one. And then number two, what do you do then from a planning standpoint, both before and after a breach, to put yourself in the best position to react and respond to that breach? We need to understand that if you take only one thing away from everything you hear this morning, what you should take away is that a cybersecurity event, a data breach, is not an if issue, but a when issue. Everyone sitting in this room is not only at risk for a breach, but will likely be breached at some point, right? It's not an if, but a when. And when you recognize that it's not an if proposition, but a when proposition, you start to understand the importance of putting yourself in the best position to mitigate that risk both before it happens and then after it happens. The average cost of a data breach, when we start to understand that it's not an if but a when, the average cost to an organization that's breached to respond to and remedy that breach is $4 million. Now, that number is going to vary by how large your organization is, how many pieces of data are exposed or are stolen. So the number is going to vary. So this is a big picture, very average number. But when we say this is what it costs to remedy, to respond to and remedy a data breach, number one, we can see this is a 2017 number. There's no data yet for 2018. Up 29% since 2013. So in 4 years, it's increased 29%. So the cost is not decreasing, it's increasing, number one. And number two, this cost, we're not just talking about the securing our systems cost and the technology cost of the breach, but we're talking about notification to people that have had information stolen as a result of the breach. We're talking about downtime responding to or remedying the breach. We're talking about reputational harm suffered as a result of the breach. Does anybody feel comfortable with Equifax holding on to your information today? Right, the reputational harm that goes along with that data breach. And so when we start to understand the cost that's involved with responding to the breach, and that the number one cause by far of data breach incidents occurring is employee error, we start to kind of put a picture together of, okay, what can we do to put ourselves in a position we're not going to stop every breach from happening, but to at least put ourselves in a position to kick the can down the road, to deploy our employees to be our best line of defense. If we understand that employee error, we're not talking about the North Korean kid sitting in a hovel trying to hack into your system through a brute force attack. We're talking about the employee that doesn't understand, and we're going to talk about all of these in some depth, doesn't understand the dangers that go along with unsecured or open Wi-Fi networks, or proper password security, or what to do if a device is lost or stolen. The harm that your employees can cause, not through malice, right, but just through ignorance. Okay, they just don't know any better. And to give employees the tools, okay, to be your first and best line of defense, because if employee error is the number one cause, that's where we should be allocating the bulk of our dollars from a cyber compliance standpoint. It's training, it's policies, it's making sure our employees are properly educated and have the proper tools to understand what they can do to help secure your environments from the bad guys that are out there trying to access your information. And it starts as simple as making sure your employees understand what security procedures you have in place for your systems, right? From a technology standpoint, right, it's things like firewalls, making sure data is encrypted. That's technology, that's security. From an employee standpoint, do your employees understand the importance of making sure that their mobile devices are password protected? Do you require that their mobile devices be password protected? Do you require that their desktops or laptops or whatever they're using to access your environment, access your data, have sufficient security protocols implemented on them so that if a device is lost or stolen, or if a vendor comes into your environment, or a cleaning person or whomever, that device is going to be locked down and not be able to be accessed. Do you have reasonable password protocols in place to make your passwords as secure as possible? I find this data to be fascinating, how long it takes somebody to crack a password. 7 lowercase letters. It would take someone using software that's available for a couple of dollars on the dark web, 29 hundredths of a millisecond to crack a 7-letter lowercase password. Just by adding 5 letters to go from 7 letters to 12 letters, you take the amount of time it would take an algorithm to crack that password from 29 hundredths of a millisecond up to 2 centuries, right? So you look at it, this is no different than having the security system in your home, or even the sign on your front lawn that says this house is protected by ADT. You want deterrence in place, okay? And so just having the policy that says, passwords must be no less than 12 characters in length, you are putting procedures in place that are going to make it not impossible, but very difficult for the bad guys to crack passwords on your network, on your devices, such that you're making them look elsewhere to try to gain access. Again, the more complex we make passwords, the harder they become to crack. Just adding the letter or the word password, all lowercase, if we just add a capital P, you take the amount of, you increase, or rather it takes the amount of time it would take lightning to strike 2 to 3 times to crack password with a capital P. You add, an ampersand for the A, a 0 for the O, and another capital letter. You increase that to 14 years. So when you combine the length of the password with the complexity of the password, you start to put together a picture of deterrence, passwords that become difficult to crack. Are your employees reusing passwords on multiple devices from multiple accounts? Do they have the same password for your network computer in your office as they do for their PC at home? Is their Facebook password the same as their Gmail password, the same as your Outlook or Exchange password to log into your email in your at your workplace? The reason why that is not a bad practice, not a good practice, is because when one account is hacked, right? When account credentials are stolen from one account, if passwords are reused, all the bad guys got to do is take that password and start plugging it in to to random sites all over the internet to see if that password is reused. So if somebody gets a password on one site, if Facebook is hacked and your password is stolen on Facebook and you reuse that password on Gmail, on your Exchange server, on your network, on your whatever, if that password is reused, you're then giving that person access to every account that you have on the internet just by virtue of reusing that password. From a best practices standpoint, I recommend to my clients that they invest in things like password managers, software that generates random passwords of various length and various complexity, numbers, letters, ASCII characters, and what have you, that are randomly generated for every site and then stored somewhere so that when you're in your browser, it's a master password that unlocks passwords for all accounts that someone has. The other options that employees use are things like leaving passwords on sticky notes or notepads on their desk, or reusing passwords for multiple accounts so they don't forget passwords. For various reasons, they're all not great practices to have because of the risk of theft or reuse of passwords and what have you. So what I recommend to my clients is password managers to generate random passwords, different passwords for each site that they use, remotely, securely stored, and then able to access through either apps on your phone or extensions on browsers or what have you. The ability to remote wipe a device, and do employees know what to do if a device is lost or stolen? Remote wipe technology solution, if a device is lost or stolen, do you have the technology in place to wipe that device remotely? Do your employees know what to do if a device is lost or stolen? If the device is password protected, sufficiently likely the data on that device is going to be encrypted. But regardless, A, if the device is not password protected, or B, if weak or insecure passwords or what have you, you need to have the ability to remote wipe a device, and your employees need to know what to do when that device is lost or stolen. Do your employees know, for example, if they lose their iPhone, right? They're leave it on the counter at Starbucks and walk out of Starbucks without it, and then an hour later they remember, they go back to Starbucks, the device is gone. If your employees' first call is to Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, whomever their mobile carrier is, and the carrier shuts off that device remotely on the carrier side, your IT department might lose the ability to remote wipe that device because that device is now off the grid once the carrier turns it off on their side. Your employees need to understand that their first call when a device is lost or stolen should not be to their carrier, but should be to your IT department or to your IT vendor or provider, so that they, from whatever mobile device management solution they're using, can wipe the device on their end before the employee goes and takes care of making sure that things are handled from their carrier's perspective. Open Wi-Fi, another huge security risk that employees don't understand the risk of, and B, because they don't understand the risk, are using it all the time. We are always looking for ways, right, to save on data costs, right? For example, we are looking for, I don't want to use up the data plan on my phone. For those of us that have, for example, bring your own device, you're connecting your own device onto your company's network. I'm going to connect my device onto whatever Wi-Fi I find and use their data, not my own. Or I'm on the road, I'm traveling, I'm going to duck into a Starbucks and get network access for an hour to use their Wi-Fi or what have you. I'm going to play a quick video which is going to illustrate the danger, and it's got sound, so hopefully this will work.
Inside Terminal 5 at the Los Angeles International International Airport, dozens of people are. Gregory Evans is a former hacker. His resume includes 2 years in federal prison.
Where's it coming from?
Operations in the world. We set up in a corner of the terminal so that Evans, who now owns a cybersecurity company, could show us just how vulnerable people are to hackers.
I will go and set up a fake Wi-Fi and watch everybody connect to it. And once they connect to it and they start surfing the internet, now what I'll do is just grab all their traffic.
We launched a fake network named LAX Free Wi-Fi. Within minutes, people started connecting to it. Evans then showed us how a hacker can record everything off a computer that joined our network by tracking what I was doing on my laptop.
So if they go to their bank, it'll grab all their banking information. If they go to their Facebook, it'll grab all that. Their Twitter accounts, if they're writing love letters, I can grab all of that.
Or, Evans says even worse, if a hacker has enough time, spyware can be installed, which stays with the victim.
You get on the plane, you go to one country, I go to another. But everything that you do, as long as you have that computer, is going to be emailed back to me.
All right, so that's how simple it is for someone to via an open Wi-Fi network to poach or steal information that's on someone's device. They can, through that open Wi-Fi network, can actively monitor what's going on, can actively, take information, or can through that network remotely install, malware and other monitoring software to gain continual access to that device, and people fall for it. People don't understand the risk associated with that. When the RNC was here 2 years ago, a local tech company set up a test out on the courtyard outside the queue. They, for an hour, set up open Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi networks with names like Google Starbucks or Trump for president or Don't Vote Hillary 2016 to try to lure people to log on to those Wi-Fi networks. They took a general, set it up for an hour, these open Wi-Fi networks with these alluring names, and in that hour, more than 1,300 people in that area logged onto those various public open Wi-Fi networks. And again, this was a test. They weren't there to do any harm. They were just there to prove a point. But the point they proved was that people don't understand that when a Wi-Fi network is called Google Starbucks, that it may not be Google Starbucks. When you set up a Wi-Fi network, you can call it whatever you want to call it, right? You can call it Google Starbucks. You can call it Trump for president. You can call it Don't Vote for Hillary. You can call it whatever. But the bad guys, the cyber criminals that are looking to get people to log into those networks so they can do what you saw done in that video, are playing on people's need to be connected 24/7, people's need to have Wi-Fi where they might not otherwise have data available to them. And once they get on those networks, right, we saw in the quick video clip what these cyber criminals can do. So your employees need to understand the risk associated with these open Wi-Fi networks. And really, the best practices here are twofold. Number one, your employees should not be on these networks, number one. And number two, if they need access mobily, either, number one, provide them with secure hotspots that they can use, or number two, give them VPNs, virtual private networks, that they can use to log on to your network, which adds the security necessary for even if they are in a Starbucks or in a DoubleTree or out in public where there might be just a publicly available AT&T or Time Warner network or whatever, allows them to securely log onto your network even through these otherwise insecure open Wi-Fi. Ryan talked during his talk about phishing and gave you some examples, a really good example of a phishing email. The reason why people right? The bad guys, the cyber criminals still send phishing emails is because they work, right? If they didn't work, people wouldn't send them, right? And so your employees need to understand what to look for when they are presented with an email that might be a phishing attack. Do they understand that, Amazon probably isn't going to send you an email from management at mazoncanada.ca, right? Does the email address of the sender match the person's expectation of who's going to be sending the email? Is it a generically, is the greeting generic, or is it personalized to you, the recipient? Do your employees understand that you can call a URL anything you want to call it, and that the title of the URL, right, that you see in on a web page or in an email or in a document doesn't necessarily match where that's going to go if you click on it? Do they understand that you can hover over a URL with the pointer on your mouse to see where that URL is going to redirect to? Or on a mobile device, what I do, if I'm presented with something that I think might be an attempt to phish me, either in a text message or a mobile email or even on a web page, I'll hover over the URL, I'll copy the hyperlink, and then I'll paste it into the Notes app on my device to see whether or not where that URL is going to take me matches what the URL is called in the email, or the text, and that's one way to tell: am I being phished, or is this legitimate? Is that really going to take me to Amazon.com to sign into my Amazon account, or is it going to take me to redirect.whatever.com, which I promise you is a URL that you don't want to go to? Employees have gotten, again, these things work, so they're used, but employees they're not great, but they have gotten better at recognizing an email like this for what it is. So what the bad guys have done has started using social engineering to create better, more targeted phishing attempts to lure people. What they want to do, they want you to click on that attachment or click on that link because that's what's going to install the malware, that's what's going to install the ransomware. And they've gotten better and better at doing that. Or people have gotten better at recognizing it. So what the cyber criminals have done have gotten better at disguising the emails, disguising the phishing attempts through social engineering. We all, right? How many people are on Facebook? How many are on LinkedIn? How many are on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Tinder? Okay. We share a tremendous amount of information about ourselves online. Some of it on Facebook and can be locked down through privacy settings, but a lot of it is out there for public consumption. And the cyber criminals are using this publicly available information to build social profiles about us and are sending much more targeted emails to get us to click that link and install the bad stuff on our computers, on our systems. This is an example of one of these more complex phishing attempts. It is someone, a cyber criminal, who has, through social engineering, specifically targeting people in the Microsoft security group on LinkedIn, and has determined that people who belong to the Microsoft security group on LinkedIn might be more likely to click the link that is going to connect them to the guru of Microsoft, Bill Gates himself, than they would on just a generic, dear customer or dear client phishing email. So you have, this looks like, if you've ever received an invitation to a connection on LinkedIn, this is what the email looks like, exactly what it looks like, what you're going to get from LinkedIn. Bill Gates has indicated you're a fellow group member of Microsoft Security. I'd like to add you to my professional network on LinkedIn, B. Gates, right? And if you belong to the Microsoft Security Network, why would you not want to be, why would you not want to be connected on LinkedIn to Bill Gates? And so very tempting for someone to click on that link As soon as you click on that link, however, you're not going to become LinkedIn best buddies with Bill Gates. You're going to install whatever malware or ransomware this particular cyber criminal wants to install on your computer, on your servers, or what have you. So again, your employees need to be trained to recognize these emails for what they are, because these types of things are what is going to cause the breaches to happen more often than not, which leads us to the second piece I want to talk about, which is, what is your cyber action plan? What are you doing from a preventative standpoint before a breach happens, and then after a breach happens to respond to that breach? A lot of information I'm going to run through in a very short amount of time. This is not meant to be, by any stretch of the imagination, a detailed, step-by-step, everything you need to do to plan for and remedy a breach. Plan for a breach before it happens and remedy a breach after it happens. Very high-level picture of the types of issues you should be thinking about within your organizations before the breach and then after the breach. Do you have a data breach response policy, right? Do you know what you're going to do when a breach occurs before the breach happens? Because when the breach happens, as we talked about before, right, the bad guys have been on your network for, 254 days? Was that the number? Right? 284. All right. They've been on your network for a long time, right? And under the law, you only have a certain amount of time to respond once you learn of the breach, right? To notify those people who have had information stolen that you've been breached, right? Depending on the state, it might be 30 days, it might be 45 days, it might be 60 days, but it's a short amount of time to respond. And the longer it takes you to respond, the more damage is going to be done, the more information is going to be exposed, the more it's going to cost to remedy the breach, right? And so knowing what you're going to do before it happens is the best thing you can do to quickly, to as quickly as possible, respond to the breach, right? So do you know what states you operate in and what those states' data breach notification requirements are? Do you know what you're going to do? Who's going to be on the incident response team? How often are you reviewing the policy to make sure it's up to date with current legal requirements and best practices? What kind of reviews do you do of your information systems and other data for PII, personally identifiable information, right? The private stuff that people want to get, the social security numbers, the medical records, whatever information, credit card numbers, financial information, right? Not just, when we think of data breaches, we think of, I don't work in the financial sector, I don't work in the medical sector, I'm a small manufacturer, what do I have to worry about? As it was mentioned before, right, Target was breached not through Target, but through its HVAC vendor, right? So people might try to breach you because they want to get access to someone bigger that you do business with, or you may be a small manufacturer of widgets that someone in China wants to get access to whatever information you store on your server so they can reverse engineer what you make so they can flood the market with cheap knockoffs of your product. Or even though you're not a financial institution, you may have customer credit card information that you store. Or even though you are not a medical provider, you may store employee medical information relative to their medical insurance applications and benefits and what have you. So just because don't work or don't operate in the medical sphere or the financial sphere doesn't mean there is not information that you want to get, and you need to know, right, where you're storing those things, right? What is your risk and threat assessment for access to your information? Who has access to PII, right? Who has access to that information and how are they accessing it? What types of security controls do you have in place and how long are you keeping data for? Are you reviewing and updating your data destruction policies? Do you know Do you know how long you're storing your information for, and are you appropriately and properly destroying information, getting rid of, purging information that you no longer need to have? Are you monitoring your PII and other data for leakage and loss? Right? What types of tools do you have to track what data it might be flowing out of your network? Right? Part of the reason why it took Target so long to identify the fact that they were breached is because they really weren't monitoring what information was going out of their network. It wasn't until a large volume of information was leaked out that someone finally discovered that information through the Target breach was flowing out of their network through the breach. If you are not doing things to actively monitor on the technology side what information might be flowing out of your network, or maybe where are there inappropriate access to your network from unexpected places, right? Do you see access to your network from China when you don't have any business dealings in China, for example? If you're not monitoring these things, you may not know that data is flowing out of your network to places that it should not be going. Are you, as we talked about earlier, what type of privacy and security awareness training are you providing to your employees? What types of things are you requiring your vendors or customers to subscribe to as a condition of doing business with you? The people that have hands-on or eyes on your data, what type of training are you requiring them to undergo? What types of policies, procedures, protocols do you have in place? And what training are you providing such that your people understand what is required of them from a privacy and data handling standpoint? Okay. You've been hacked. What do you do, right? What do you do to respond to the breach? Let me give you an example of what not to do, and then we'll talk about what to do. Anybody have an Uber account? Anybody use Uber? Do you know that Uber was breached in 2016? 57 million user accounts were breached. Logins, passwords, credit card information, all taken out of Uber. What did Uber do to respond to the breach? They didn't immediately notify their customers. They didn't follow data breach laws for any of the states in which they operate. What Uber did was Uber located the two people that had hacked into the Uber network, the two criminals that had hacked into their network and stolen the 57 million customer accounts, and they essentially put them on their payroll. Uber said, essentially we're creating a program where we're going to hire you for $100,000. We're going to hire you to attempt to hack into our system and tell us where our weak points are. So they essentially turned the criminals into employees, right? Think about whether you want those kind of people working for you. Number one, not that you shouldn't be doing things like penetration testing and security testing and all those things to test the validity of your network and your security, but you should be doing it through legitimate IT providers, legitimate vendors, not the criminals that broke into your network and stole 57 million customer accounts. And so, when you're hacked, don't do what Uber did. Don't put the criminals on your payroll. What you should be doing is following a series of steps to shore up the breach, shore up your systems, figure out what's been missing, where the access was, and then notify as appropriate under the law. First thing you got to do when you suspect that there's been a breach is you have to validate that the breach even occurred. Don't assume that every incident that you become aware of has been a breach of PII or other company data, you need to kind of get in and you have to dig through the data, dig through your systems to determine whether or not a breach has actually occurred. And if you determine that a breach has occurred, where did the breach happen? What information was disclosed? And how was that information disclosed through your network? Now, you should have, because we've done the planning before, you should have your data breach response team already in place and ready to be deployed. So you're now going to have to figure out who's going to run your breach response. You're going to have to start documenting what is being done in terms of responding to that breach, and you want to coordinate the flow of information and manage the public messaging about the breach. There is a time and a place for public dissemination of information about a breach. Once you've been breached, under the 48 of the 50 states have specific laws that say when, where, and how you notify those impacted by the breach about the breach. Part of what you want to do here is manage not just the flow of information to those people impacted, but also the reputational harm that could come from the breach itself. So to manage the public flow of information about the fact that you've been breached, to manage whatever reputational harm your organization may suffer as a result about the breach. And now you're going to deploy your incident response team, which is, should already be there and ready to go, but cuts across many aspects of an organization. It's not just IT, legal, public affairs and public relations, risk management, finance, audit, and then if you suspect an internal incident or something, a malicious employee, HR, what's the status of the breach? Is it past, ongoing, or has it ended? If it's ongoing, what can you do to immediately prevent further data loss? What have you done to mitigate against, what have you done to mitigate the breach? And then again, the confidential piece, advise your staff to keep the breach details in confidence until they're notified. Otherwise, again, managing the messaging. What's the scope of the breach? How broad or how deep is the breach? Do you suspect criminal activity? And if so, should you be notifying law enforcement? Have you identified all affected data, machines, and devices? Have you conducted interviews with key personnel and documented facts that have come out that maybe led to the cause of the breach? Have you taken appropriate steps to preserve evidence for later forensic analysis to determine exactly how the breach occurred and what was leaked? And then in terms of that evidence preservation, are you doing things like preserving logs, server logs, et cetera, applicable to the breach for later examination? Specific to the issue of law enforcement, when your breach occurs, you should be consulting with your counsel. But one of the things that your counsel should be talking to you about is whether or not you need to notify the authorities, which should be, if you believe a crime has been committed, number one, or number two, if your particular state data breach notification law requires that law enforcement be notified. And again, there are 48 different laws across 50 states, and you need to know what law applies or what laws apply based on the states in which potential data was lost or stolen. What does your state law say about how, when, and where to notify the owners of the data, right? The individuals of whose PII might have been leaked or stolen. Your state law is going to dictate how, when, how and when that notification is going to take place. You want to make sure that the people investigating the breach are doing it in a forensically appropriate manner, such that evidence. You are preserving and not destroying evidence that you may need later on, whether it's to provide to the authorities or because you're engaged in litigation down the road as a result of the breach. Are you doing this in-house or through an outside vendor? Are you talking to your legal counsel and IT about what you should be doing to protect whatever digital evidence there is? If law enforcement is involved, are you coordinating with them rather than conflicting with them so that you're not stepping on their toes in their investigation? What are you doing to safely and appropriately store the evidence that's discovered? And then what are you doing in terms of clearly compromised machines, devices, and what have you? Are you disposing of them? Are you wiping them and rebuilding them? Is your data appropriately backed up so that you can restore if necessary? Again, what are your notification obligations? Again, state law will dictate a couple things to think about when you are making the decision of how to notify and to whom to and whom to notify. You want to be straight up and honest with people. You don't want to be, and this is where things like PR and media relations will come into play. You don't want to be evasive or incomplete in what you are telling people in terms of what happened. Are you going to, like Equifax did, although they didn't handle it great initially, provide credit monitoring or identity theft protection to mitigate the risk of negative consequences to those people impacted by the breach? You want to work, this is really where you want to work closely with your media relations or PR folks to craft the message that's, number one, going to the people impacted, but that number two, that goes out to the media. And you want to make sure that those people that are impacted by the data breach will learn about it before the media does. You want to control the messaging. And if somebody has had their PII stolen as a result of your data breach, you want to make sure that they hear it from you and not from, the plain dealer or from the local news station. And then what do you do from a planning perspective moving forward, right? What caused the breach? What can we do from a planning perspective to make sure that breach, that incident doesn't happen again in the future? You want to not just look at what caused the breach to mitigate against that particular or breach incident happening in the future, but then you want to audit your response as well. What did we do well in discovering the breach, responding to the breach, and what can we do better? What can we do better next time? What improvements can we make to our incident response team, our incident response handling, our auditing, our looking at our systems and whatnot to do things better the next time, if and when there is a next time. And then what are we doing with our people from an information security and training standpoint to help prevent or mitigate against future breaches from occurring? Again, as I said at the outset, data breaches are not an if proposition, but a when proposition. Your organization will be breached at some point. The likely cause of that breach will be your people. The question that you have to answer as you leave here today and take all this information back to your organizations is, what are we doing well with our people so that they understand these risks? What can we be doing better with our people so they understand them better? And then what are we doing organizationally to prepare ourselves, to put ourselves in the best position possible to react and respond to the breach, not if it happens, but when it happens. So thank you all for your time this morning. I think we are now slotted for a short, 15-minute break?
We are. Thanks, John. That was great. Lots of great information today. So obviously as you can see from the agenda, we're halfway through. There's been a lot of information. We're going to take a quick break. If this has been a lot and has your head spinning, maybe you're thinking about what's going on in my business, how secure are we, how ready are we if something like this happens, Warwick is offering a complimentary network assessment to everybody in attendance today. So if you want to stop by, we have a table set up in the back if you want to ask some questions, get info on how that would work. Otherwise, we're free till 10:15. Grab some coffee, networking, and take a quick break. We'll see you back at 10:15. So good morning. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Heather Maver. I'm one of the newer technology consultants to join Warwick. And prior to being with Warwick, I was actually an insurance broker myself and focusing on cyber liability and helping clients with that risk management piece of things. So it's my honor to introduce Chris Zitto, who has been serving clients since 1980 and joined Zitto Insurance in 1989, where he's now the president. So cybersecurity, as you guys have heard today, is a constantly evolving topic, and the way that insurance addresses that is also evolving and emerging continuously. So please help me welcome Chris Zitto.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you all for sticking around. I know insurance is a favorite topic for all of you. My original comments that were going to be 20 to 25 minutes are now probably down to 10 or 15 after the great job that Ryan and John did. So I'll try and avoid the duplication if I can. And I'm also, because of that, I've added some notes, so I'm going to refer to cheat sheets, so you'll have to bear with me there. Cyber liability has clearly been the hottest topic in our industry for several years now, for all the reasons that John and Ryan talked about earlier. But despite that, it's estimated that only 1 in 3 businesses actually carry some kind of cyber protection. I'd be curious of those of you in the room who carries cyber liability insurance now, or who thinks you do. I know Heidi does. Okay, all right. So good. Most of you don't actually, which is very typical. And a lot of reason for that is because we don't know what we don't know. Education is huge, and that's why I applaud Warwick for holding this event, because as you now know, if you aren't scared about data breach and privacy issues after the first 2 presenters, you should be. It's a big deal. So I'm glad you're here. The one important thing to know about cyber liability policies is, unlike a lot of other insurance that you're familiar with, car insurance, property insurance, general liability insurance, it's a non-standardized coverage. I would be hard-pressed to find 2 cyber policies side by side that would look anything like each other. Even though they may cover the same things at the end of the day, their terminology is different, their definitions are different, the nomenclature, coverage, intent. So it's important that you are working with somebody that actually understands this type of insurance and can give you the proper advice. I guess I forgot to click ahead here. That was just a quick commercial for who we are, but I think you know that by now. So it's again, it's critical that you understand what you're buying, because it by no definition is it remotely the same. The term cyber liability has a connotation that all these data breaches are electronic in nature. And a lot of clients or prospects that I talk with and make the recommendation of the coverage, they will say to me, well, we don't do e-commerce. People can't buy stuff off my website. We don't take credit cards. So thanks, but no thanks. Number one, what they don't realize is they can be affected by a million different sources, as was illustrated in this morning's presentations. But also, data breaches are not always electronic. Some examples of claims or incidents that are not electronic would be you leave your briefcase. For those of you who still have briefcases, leave them in the car and it gets stolen. You leave a confidential file on a desktop, or somebody breaks into a file cabinet. Documents that should be shredded are put in a trash can or a dumpster, and there are people called dumpster divers that go in and look for these type of things. So just because you don't do business electronically or you do it in a limited fashion doesn't mean you aren't exposed to data breaches. To complicate the coverage further, what a lot of insurance companies have now started to do is allow you to bundle coverages that were typically found in other areas of your policy, such as crime coverages, data processing coverages, and bundle them and combine them into a cyber policy. There are 3 basic ways that you can typically buy cyber insurance. One, which is the most basic, most affordable, and easiest to get, is as a rider or endorsement to your basic business policy. A lot of companies are coming out with these endorsements. They'll call them all kinds of things. They'll call them cyber protector. They'll call them data defender. They'll call them whatever trademark they want to put on them. And these are certainly better than nothing, but they tend to create a false sense of security because they're very limited in terms of the limit of coverage you can buy and the scope of the type of claims they will defend against. A lot of the endorsements that are purchased in this manner may only cover mandated expense coverages like customer notification costs or credit monitoring services. They often do not provide any coverage for legal defense when you get sued or a settlement award if you lose a suit. The next method of buying the coverage is often through, many of you may have what we call a management liability policy, which would include things like directors and officers liability, employment practices liability, trustee fiduciary liability. It can be lumped in or bundled with those. And often I call it better versus best. Some of the company's forms done that way are very comparable to the last method, but generally speaking, the preference is to buy a separate policy that was designed and written specifically to protect against data breach, privacy type claims. There are two general categories for cyber policies and cyber events, if you will. There are first-party claims, third-party claims. Simply, first-party are incidents or claims where the policyholder, the people in this room, are going to be their companies will be affected by the breach. The third-party claim is when your company does something where somebody alleges that because of your negligence, they suffered a cyber loss, and therefore you're responsible then for the damages. So I'm going to run through some examples of the type of coverages that would be found under both first-party and third-party claims, just to give you some examples. So the first-party cyber claims would include business interruption. All these incidents that, again, John and Ryan talked about earlier, if you're affected, your system shut down, you've got reputational issues, you potentially lose profits, and incur extra expense to try and make those problems go away. So business interruption is one of the coverages that can be purchased within a cyber policy. Dependent business interruption does the exact same thing. It protects your lost profits, but not because your company suffered the breach. It's because a third party vendor potentially suffered the breach. So maybe it's the people that host your cloud, or maybe it's your payroll service, or somebody else that you depend on. They've been breached, and therefore it suffers you to have a loss of revenue as well. Cyber extortion. This refers to the ransomware, which you heard a lot about this morning. In a few minutes, I've got some real life examples, which I think will bring this home for you. But it's clearly one of the hot topics in today's environment, and you've seen TV commercials, you're hearing about it all the time, but it's become a big deal. And I've got some real life cases I'll share with you in a minute. Forensics expenses, crisis management, these are all things that when you have a breach, as John pointed out, every state has its own set of privacy laws that require you to do certain things if you've been notified of a breach. It may be notifying all the affected parties. It may be paying for credit monitoring. It may be investigating how it happened. These are all expenses that come out of your pocket that can be paid for through a cyber policy. Crisis management, again, reputational, PR, money you spend to tell your customers that, hey, we're okay, we got breached, but we're in business, your data's safe, you don't have to worry. Another category that can be added is data processing. This is often, again, this coverage is often found on a traditional business policy, but this would cover expenses for the cost to recover lost data that was infected by a virus, to get the virus out of your system. And again, business interruption again. And the third category under the first party bucket, if you will, is our crime. Funds transfer fraud. The bank gets a wire instruction from who they believe is your company, and they wire $100,000 out of your account to somebody in the Cayman Islands because it looks so legitimate. Telephone fraud. Somebody hacks your system and makes long distance calls to Taiwan for the next 3 months, and you get a bill that you're fighting with your telephone provider for. Social engineering, also known as deception fraud. Again, this was touched on this morning, and I've also got some examples of real-life cases of how this happened. Essentially, social engineering fraud is a case where you or your employees are tricked into believing you are working with somebody that you normally work with, and they deceive you into voluntarily releasing your money or your product to somebody that was not who you thought it was. And criminal reward, this allows, again, this will pay for funds to try and track down the perpetrator. So the second category is third party. And again, this is where you have a responsibility or liability to a third party because of things that you haven't done well or to protect your customers or your employees' data. So some areas here, again, not only does it cover defense costs when you get sued, it will cover the settlement of the award that the court says you're responsible for. It will cover the regulatory penalties that the state may impose on you. For those of you that accept credit cards, there's PCI compliance issues that you have to be aware of. And again, if you weren't, there are fines and penalties associated with that. Communications and media liability. You have a website. It may or may not be transactional, but people can hack your website and post bad stuff on it that you'd be held responsible for. So again, if you have an electronic presence in the world, you are vulnerable. Again, I'm being redundant because you heard that all this morning, but it's very true. So hopefully by now you understand that there is a need for cyber insurance. Much like Ryan and John's roles in life to help prevent these from happening, cyber insurance is the protection that after, in spite of all their best efforts, as John said, it isn't if, it's when. So when it happens, you're either going to come out of pocket for these expenses or you're going to pass it off to your insurance provider and they're going to pay for it. So what does it cost? I spoke about the good, better, best. The cyber endorsements added to your business package policy are normally very inexpensive, as low potentially as $75 maybe to $250, $300. So they're very affordable, but like everything in life, you get what you pay for. So it's going to be limited in coverage. It's going to be limited in not only in the type of coverage or types of claims it will pay for, limited in the amount of coverage you can buy. It'll have sub-limits for different types of coverages. And again, unless you're used to reading insurance policies or your agent is keeping you on top of it, you're just not going to know that until it's too late. Again, the standalone policies that were written and designed to cover cyber exposures by far are a better answer, but they also are much more expensive. They typically will run anywhere from $1,000 to, I've got a client that pays six figures for their cyber coverage, but they've got $10 million of coverage and they're a big company. So it all depends on the size of your company, the type of information you keep, the type of protection you have in place. That all affects the premiums. And then to further that, these are some of the things that the insurance companies look at when they're determining how much they're going to charge you for cyber coverage. What type of response plans do you have in place? Again, going back to the previous presentations, this is critical. What kind of data do you keep? How many records do you have? Basically, contractual risk transfer. When you've got an account with PayPal or somebody, or any of your vendors, have you read the contract? Are they responsible if they get breached? Are they responsible to protect you? These are all things that insurance companies look at when they're determining how much risk you pose to them as a client and how much they're going to charge you for their protection. What kind of employee training you do? And we've hit on that all morning. That's absolutely critical. So some real life claim situations. Well, no, I'll stop it. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead here. These are some general sources of claims. Again, a lot of this is what you've already heard this morning. We may have all the security in the world within our offices, but maybe we have salespeople out with unencrypted cell phones and iPads. If you're a retail operation, you may have a wireless, I'll call it a cash register, a point of sale. There's been a lot of cases where people sat in parking lots and captured credit card information over the air that was being transmitted from the wireless point of sale unit. Stolen documents, phones, laptops, all pretty self-explanatory. Disgruntled employees. Candidly, that's in the minority, but those are situations. I mean, most of the errors do come from employee errors. On rare occasion, there are some that are deliberate. And of course, staff mistakes, which touched on this morning too, that's by far the most common. So here are some real life claim examples. And these are not things that were buried in statistics that travelers put out in some publication. These are phone calls that I took that called and said, Chris, I got a problem. So I'm going to just run through a few of these with you. And there are different types of claims that would affect different parts of the policy. But it gives you an example of that these things really do happen. Okay, my first example, I have a large nonprofit that keeps medical data on probably 600-700 clients. Their HR person, not their HR, but the person, their client services director, had all of the client data backed up on a flash drive, put it in her purse, decided to go to the baseball game. While she's at the baseball game, her car got stolen with her purse in it. So, needless to say, that flash drive is floating around who knows where with all that private information on it. So, they had to report it as a potential breach. They had to issue letters to hundreds and hundreds of potentially affected people. Fortunately, that one didn't go anywhere because the people involved weren't, I'll say, high risk. So it ended up dying a natural death, but it was an example of one that could have been a real big deal. Another one, this was an example of the cyber extortion claim, which was affected by ransomware. My client in this case is a distributor of industrial pumps. So in the middle of workday, all of a sudden, everybody's screen blanks out, and up pops a website for CryptoLock. And CryptoLock says, we have encrypted your data, you're not getting it back unless you pay us a ransom. And there was a timer on there, 24-hour timer, and said it was ticking by the second, said you have 24 hours to pay the ransom or your data's gone forever. So, and as I don't know if John or Ryan pointed out, they sent a set of instructions that said, here's the deal. You go buy Bitcoin and you send it to this account, and we'll give your data back. So they got the company credit card, went and bought Bitcoin, transferred it, and a day later, life was good again. That is until 30 days later when it happened a second time. And in the middle of that, they had the IT person in adding more firewalls. So again, you can even with best efforts, there is no certainty that it's not going to happen again as you can stop these people forever. Another example. This happened to be a retail client. They got an order of product from one of their regular customers that they had the credit card information on file. They ship it out. They get paid by Visa. As it turns out, their customer's credit card had been hacked. So customer gets their bill a month later, says, I never bought 27 pairs of pajamas. So they call Visa and they say, I never bought these. So Visa says, okay, take it off your bill. And of course, they claw the money back from my client. So my client's out the money, out the pajamas. So, and that, again, that can happen, whether that could be funds, that could be product, it could be anything. That would be an example of a social engineering claim. Again, they were tricked into thinking they were doing business with somebody that they really weren't. Another social engineering claim. This case is a plastic injection molding company. Client gets an email from who he thought was his payroll provider, so he sends 100 W-2s to this address. Finds out later it wasn't his payroll company. A week later, he gets a letter from the IRS warning him of this this scam being out there and be on the lookout for it. Of course, by then it was too late. So fortunately, he had cyber coverage. He turned the claim in, and the insurance company took it from there. Sent out the notification letters, paid for credit monitoring, and any liability that came from any of those cases, they handled. So it was a happy ending, but again, another example of how that works. Then one more, again, this is a social engineering example. And sadly, this is the same client that had the case with the crypto locker, the ransomware. Ohio State is one of his customers. He gets a purchase order from Ohio State for $50,000 or $60,000 worth of pumps. So they think it's a great day. They ship the pumps out, and a month later they haven't gotten paid. They call accounts payable, and they say, well, we never ordered any pumps from you. So it turns out that somebody had hacked Ohio State's server, got a copy of their purchase order, and started sending it out to people all over the country, and they now have thousands and thousands of dollars worth of pumps for free. And of course, my client never got paid. So again, these all really happened. They really happened to my clients. So I can tell you firsthand, it does happen, and the cyber insurance is available that would have covered, and in some cases did, every one of the situations. So it's real stuff. Oops. Okay. Again, this is claim data, and I'm not going to spend much time on it because John and Ryan already did. So again, I know you've seen enough statistics today, but it just reinforces the fact that this is happening all over the country, and it's increasing as every day that goes by. This data is based on claims that were actually, this is insurance company data, insurance industry data, so it's based on claims that actually were filed. It doesn't even speak to all the claims that occurred where people didn't have the coverage to file a claim. So this just talks about the business sectors on who are affected. Healthcare obviously was a big one. Professional services was a big one. And retail, I guess, was the third largest. None of which would surprise you. This one talks about the cause or the type of a claim that was incident. Again, the single largest was, I can't read that here, was that all other? Malware was a big one. Staff mistake, which we all know is a big one. So again, it comes from different sources, but again, that's more anecdotal. Again, these are statistics from the industry, but most of the time, these claims come from third parties, the outside end. These are not typically, although a lot of them originate from employee error, they're not deliberate or malicious employee intent. Yeah, these are just examples of some where breaches of outside vendors or third parties can affect your companies. These are just more examples. So this just shows you, after assuming you do have the coverage and a claim occurs, this is an indication of what actually happens. So the incident occurs. In this case, they would call my office. We would report to their cyber carrier. They do an investigation on what happens. The company then works with the client to develop a response plan. What do we have to do to comply with the state regulations, which might include, again, notification, credit monitoring, how do we recover the data, all that type of thing. And if there is a lawsuit involved, they're going to hire an attorney to defend the client against the affected parties. Recommendations, again, I'm not going to spend much time on this because everybody already did. By this point, you should be familiar with it. First, you have to understand what your exposure is. What kind of data do you maintain? How much of it do you have? What safeguards are in place? In one of your handouts, there's a little scorecard here that helps you assess if you're doing certain things or not doing certain things. It'll come up with a score. Again, you'll all be different, but I think it's a good exercise to go through. Staff training's huge. And obviously, I may be biased, but I do recommend that you, even if it's the inexpensive version, that you have some kind of cyber liability, because it's going to happen, and it's not inexpensive to make it go away. So what's on the horizon? Basically, word change. I equate cybercrime to the old days when, for those of you that were around then, the car thieves and the alarm manufacturers were in a constant cycle of trying to one-up each other. The car thieves would steal a car. They would invent an alarm that they couldn't get to. They'd figure that one out. And it was just kind of a vicious cycle where always trying to catch up with each other. So similarly, this is between the cyber crime crowd, hackers, and the software companies that are trying to create security programs. So as soon as they create a program, the hackers figure it out, and it just is a cat and mouse game. So the industry will continue to evolve with as the type of claims change. The states are trying to enforce regulation to try and protect the consumers and the public. But probably more than any coverage I have seen, this one is really hard to tell when or if it ever will stop, because technology never goes away. It always changes. So all we try and do in our industry is keep up with it and make sure our clients are protected based on what's happening in today's world. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Great information there. For those that aren't familiar with cyber liability insurance, obviously it's time to have that conversation with either your broker or with Chris. Just a quick note for those of you, you were handed raffle tickets on your way in. We're actually going to be giving out the raffles at the end of the event, so you're almost there. In the meantime, I'd like to welcome up Laura Green, who is one of Warwick's partners and our VP of Operations and IT Services, who will be leading the panel discussion. So I hope you have your questions ready.
Thanks, Heather. So sometimes in coming to the events, that the panel discussions are the most valuable, because this is the opportunity you have to ask any questions that may have been raised in your mind after listening to everything that's been presented today. So please, I encourage you to take advantage of the fact that we've got some very knowledgeable people here. I'm going to facilitate any questions. I'll come to you with a microphone so everyone here can hear you. And we've got about 30 minutes, so let's take advantage of that, then we'll get you moving. But again, thank you everyone for sitting through this and attending. So with that, the esteemed panel. So to anyone out here, is there a specific question anyone has in mind that we should to these gentlemen? Great.
I think you answered what I'm going to ask you about, but I missed it. Is when you go to a place like Panera's or DoubleTree and you log in, are you saying that's an open network that's not secure?
Yes.
Then where do you get a secure network outside of your home?
You can use a mobile hotspot from your phone, for example. That's what I do. So I turn my phone into my own personal hotspot that has my own. Yeah. If you're not entering a password to log on to a network, it's not secure. And conversely, for example, if you are like logging onto the network, like here at the DoubleTree, you're sharing that network with everybody else that logs onto that network. And if you're not behind your own secure password on your own network, the data that you transmit through that network is potentially exposed to everybody you're sharing that network with. So if you want to make sure that what you are accessing through that network is secure, if you're going to be on a public Wi-Fi, that's what I recommend. That's when I recommend something like a VPN, a virtual private network, which is a separate network that you log in to your network through. It basically envelops your session on the open network in your own kind of private bubble to allow to keep your session secure from everyone else who's on that network, or to use your phone, use the mobile hotspot function on your phone, so you're creating your own Wi-Fi network, your own personal Wi-Fi network through your mobile device.
If you're on a website that has HTTPS, is that then secure, or is that really not secure?
It's secure in that you know that website is going to be secure in the data that you're transmitting specifically to that website. But what you're doing through the network is still potentially open and exposed. So,
Okay. I got it.
yeah, and as you saw I know the video was kind of hard to hear, but it was a really good example of, and you can just go to YouTube, and I can circulate the URL after the event as well to people that are here. But you can just go to, it was from NBC News. You can just search like NBC News, like Wi-Fi LA Airport, and you'll find it on YouTube. And it's a really great example of just how easy it is and what can be exposed and then done with data that's from these open Wi-Fi networks.
All right, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? I think I saw one up here.
Two questions for John, and thank you everybody for your input. It was very interesting. John, you mentioned something about password managers, so I would be interested in knowing which one you recommend. That's one question. The other one has to do for a business who has its main location, let's say in Ohio, but they have dealings in multiple states. Should a breach occur, which state laws will come into play? Where the corporation is located or also where they do business?
Okay, to address the second question first, all of the state laws will apply. So it's not it's wherever data is breached, or it's controlled by the location of the individuals that have their data stolen or data breached. So if you have if you're an Ohio business, but you have national dealings, so you have data that you might have customers in or hold on to PII of people from Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, California, whatever, you may have 48 different data breach notification laws that you have to comply with when you're breached, which really just means that you need to figure out which one is the most restrictive and then just comply with that one. Because if you're going to the lowest common denominator, I guess however you look at it, the lowest common denominator of the laws, if you put them all kind of on a matrix, whatever the most restrictive law is the one you comply with, and then you will then be in compliance with all of them.
Chris, if that was to happen, since this goes to all the states, would the insurance actually cover all the different states, or do you have just different policies?
No, one policy would cover all the states, and the policy would respond based on the allegations or the damages that based on the state that it occurred in.
Oh yeah, password managers. I use LastPass. 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 It's the best, in my mind, it's the best combination of functions for cost. And I don't mean this to be an endorsement or an advertisement for LastPass. It's just the one I use. The two main, and there's a whole bunch of them, but the two main ones are LastPass and then 1Password, the number 1 password, all one word. Those are the two kind of industry leaders. They operate or they work differently. LastPass, and they all, they're not free. They all have a fee associated with them that allows you to sync your passwords across devices. So I have my passwords. I have unique passwords for each website or service that I access. And then have a master password that unlocks all my passwords on various devices, and then it syncs. So I have them on my iPhone, I have them on my work computer, I have them on my home computer, and they're all there, whatever device I'm on. LastPass stores your passwords on its server, encrypted through 256-bit encryption. It's like the highest. They say it's the highest. They tell you it's the highest level of encryption that they can use is what they encrypt your passwords with, and the only key that can unlock those passwords is the only key that can unlock your data is your unique password. So in a sense, you're giving yourself you're putting a little bit of trust in their systems and their security because they have your information stored on their servers. 1Password works a little differently in that your passwords are never permanently stored on 1Password servers. They are transmitted through their servers securely as you access data. So, but they're never actually stored on the 1Password server. They're only stored on your local whatever your local device is. So it's a more expensive solution, the subscription. So your individual mileage may vary in terms of your level of trust in their security versus your ability or willingness to share your passwords with some third-party provider. The way I come down on it is the options are you're either going to use passwords that are easy to remember and therefore easily cracked, number one. Number two, you're going to use the same password for every service, so you only have to remember one password or maybe a couple passwords across services, but then that becomes very, very, again, easy to hack. Once one password is, as I said earlier, once one password is stolen for one, then it does not complicated to then, breach whatever other services you use that password on. Or you write them down in a notepad or whatever system, whatever non-tech solution you use to save your passwords, or you put your trust in one of these password managers. And I think on balance, when I'm balancing out the security of any one of those solutions, recognizing that none of them is perfect, I think the password manager is the best solution. For my level of risk tolerance. Yours may vary, or anybody's may vary, based on how much risk you're willing to take in putting your trust in LastPass or 1Password or whomever, whichever service you use. Your level of risk tolerance may vary in how much trust you're going to place in one of those services. In my spectrum of risk, I'm okay, because I think even though there is some risk associated with it, I think there's more risk with one of the other imperfect solutions that are out there for managing my various passwords to the various sites I subscribe to. So.
So in addition to that, you have some other options. And if you choose not to use a password manager, they make it real simple. But if nothing else, if you have the opportunity to turn on multi-factor authentication for any of your accounts, do that. That's an easy way to add a second layer of security that is very unobtrusive to you and how you don't have to remember anything else. So you could have theoretically a not very secure password, not very strong password, but having another step in the process adds to that protection. I forget what the number is incrementally, but it's nearly uncrackable. Because you have, whether it be a randomly generated code using like Google Authenticator or thumbprint or something like that. So if you choose not to, for whatever reason, opt to use the password manager, whenever you can, especially on your financial services sites, anything like that, turn on multi-factor authentication.
Let me just add that even multi-factor authentication is not perfect, though, because if, for example, you use the same password across multiple sites. So let's say you have multi-factor authentication turned on your Uber account. Uber's hacked. They get your Uber password, and they also get your Gmail password because you use the same password for both sites, and your Gmail email is the email that you have linked up to your Uber account. You log onto your Uber, or Uber's hacked. Someone then goes to Uber to reset your password, for example, and then the reset email goes to your Gmail that they also now have access to because you've reused the same password for both sites. They're going to be able to seize that account, even though you have some redundancies built into your security by having an email that someone's going to have to email a password to reset a password, or a code to a second level of security through multi-factor authentication to get a PIN code to enter into access to the account from a new device. If that PIN code is being sent to the Gmail that they now also have access to because you've reused a password, they're going to be able to intercept that Gmail too, and basically by accessing your Gmail account and then bypass the multi-factor authentication. So My point is nothing's perfect. We live with this cyber stuff. We live in a very, from our perspective, we live in a very imperfect world because the cyber criminals are always one step ahead of us. So you just kind of, again, from a password standpoint, your best practice is not to reuse passwords across sites and figure out whatever system works to track and keep track of the various complex passwords that you have for all these various sites.
Another question?
This is for anyone that wants to educate me. There's been some talk about Spectre and these other vulnerabilities that are out there, I believe, in the AMD or Intel chips. To a layperson, can anyone speak to what they're talking about, and is it something to be concerned about, and what would you expect the fixes to that would be?
Well, the flaw was in, I believe, it was the certain parts of the Intel chipset, and it was actually picked up a while ago from Microsoft. So I forget what the actual date that their patch was released, but it was a while before the actual news broke. So the majority of systems were covered, but then they did release some other patches. I think it was early January 3rd or 5th or something like that, that picked up the majority of the vulnerabilities. So as long as you, again, have a layered approach to security, then it mitigated that threat relatively quickly. And a lot of the other security appliances that are typically found within corporate networks were not using those chipsets, so they didn't have any exposure to those vulnerabilities. For instance, most of the Cisco gear, Meraki gear, SonicWall gear, that kind of stuff that's at typically your perimeter, those would not have been a point of vulnerability because they weren't even using those chipsets.
Yeah, so to expand on what Mike had said, we talked about exploits with patching, for instance, and a lot of that revolved around the operating system. So you think about Windows, for instance, or Linux, and those vulnerabilities are found by the bad guys and they're exploited. The Spectre went one step further and really was taking advantage of the hardware, right? There were gaps in the hardware. So that was something that was patchable, that was fixable. The attack vector was a little bit different, but nonetheless, action has been taken. So if you're up to date, you're patched. We've seen that there could be some system performance issues to help compensate for that, but overall, it's something that's been mitigated through really just diligence and best practices with keeping machines up to date.
Those systems prompt me to, do you want to save my password? So I'm saving my password in Google Chrome for the internet site that I'm going to, or in Microsoft's Internet Explorer. So how safe am I in regards to allowing that to save that for me? And the second question I had to do with the open Wi-Fi networks that are out there. And my company has a VPN connection, so I launched my VPN connection, but that only pertains to the business software. So how do I know if I open up my Google Chrome on that network if I'm going through the VPN or not?
So to the first point, using Chrome or Internet Explorer to manage your passwords would be a substitute of sorts to using a LastPass. For me personally, I also use the program LastPass because of the way that it operates. Its ability to generate passwords for you that are very complex and So for me personally, I wouldn't want to rely on my browser. That's just my personal preference to manage my passwords. I would rather use something like a LastPass that specializes in that function, opposed to just being an add-on, so to speak, to a browser. So that's my personal preference on that question. And then the second part was around use of remote access, VPN. It's important to note that when we're talking about VPN, it's a way to almost simulate you being in the office working in a safe environment. So it's channeling traffic for you in a much safer way. And it doesn't apply just to your business applications, but it really to your internet traffic in general. So your VPN is going to be routed back through, in most cases, the firewall that you have at your home office. Another way to kind of have a firewall that's mobile is through DNS filtering. And that's looking at stopping you from connecting to malicious sites. So that's kind of another layer of protection when it comes to kind of a complementary service to a firewall is DNS filtering as well.
I'll just add to the public Wi-Fi questions, because it gets a lot of attention, and I think sometimes there may be some just inherent fear in that, especially maybe if you're using your personal device versus your corporate device, because you're kind of in charge of your personal device versus maybe your corporation is in charge of your work device. And if you're in a Panera or the airport or something like that, per that video, that's a great example. But you can take some simple steps to mitigate a lot of that risk, and it's just it's kind of like looking at a phishing attempt, right? So we'll take Panera, for example. One thing that I always do when I'm traveling or even just going to work out of the office or something like that is, obviously if you go to Panera, the Wi-Fi name is the same, right? But let's say you get frustrated with that because of the slow speed, all the people in Panera, and you look to see if there's any other wireless networks out there. And maybe someone slightly misspelled Panera and it said free or whatever. And then you hop on that one. That's kind of it's kind of like an email that was unsolicited with a weird domain name or email address. It just doesn't look right. So odds are it's not right. But so first thing, always wherever you are, ask what the Wi-Fi name is of the restaurant or coffee shop or something like that. Especially if these small mom and pop ones, they put up a home router in there to deliver their Wi-Fi. And they name it whatever they name it. And if you don't know it, you just might see a bunch of them and start guessing. Versus Panera, which is the same across all their locations, so it's a little bit easier to detect. The other thing that let you know, in most of these corporate or enterprise grade wireless systems on the guest side, most of them have by default it's turned on so that devices can't talk to each other. So while you may be on the Panera network and you've authenticated to it and you're on their guest network, the security within the wireless network says that my device, even though I'm on the same network as Ryan, they cannot talk to each other. So there is some security within the wireless network, and it grows over time, because Panera is not going to have a bunch of people squatting in their restaurants for hours on end like me if there's all kinds of these breaches happening in their spaces. But that's not always the case in the smaller ones, and it just takes a little bit of due diligence, and you'll save a lot of headaches.
Yeah, Mike expanded on that well. I don't think any of us wants you to leave and go, I'm not going to ever connect to guest Wi-Fi again. When I leave here, when I go get lunch, I'll probably connect to that Wi-Fi. It's a matter of being smart about it, right? We don't want to operate in total fear. So let's take some best practices. Let's ask the Panera, the Starbucks, is this your wireless network? Do they make you authenticate? Do they redirect you to a login page, which can be simulated, right? But still some things to look out for. In John's example in that video, that was someone who brought their own Wi-Fi, right? And they set that up in that environment, and they had ultimate access to all that traffic. So if you are on a good guest network, if you will, in a Panera and a Starbucks, something that's professionally done, you're going to have someone acting maliciously with a lot of know-how on that same network to affect you, right? Assuming that you're on the correct network. So we want to make sure that we separate those two scenarios of being on a secure network or on a properly designed guest network where others are on it, and from someone who created a fake network for the purpose of capturing your data.
Great.
Okay. Just a quick comment on the Google Chrome. Those passwords are actually visible. If somebody has physical access to your computer, they can pull your passwords. I don't know if you know that or not, but my question is, do you have or can you direct us to a security, like a generic checklist of things that somebody can do to protect themselves? You know, just from a technical standpoint, the password rules, the patch rules.
I mean, we have checklists that we've developed for our clients that we, but from a kind of policy standpoint, you know, what kind of things do you want to have in your cyber policies, for example? We have model policies that we have drafted for our clients. We have some, you know, cyber kind of audit checklists that we have. If you give me a card, I'll be happy to kind of talk to you offline about kind of what you have in place and what might be, you know, what might be worthwhile for you to look at from just a real basic audit perspective, kind of as you move forward. Does that make sense?
Okay. But nothing available to the public?
Nothing that we make publicly available, but I said, you know, we can chat offline and maybe it's something we can, you know, it's something I'm happy to talk through with you.
Okay.
I said talk through without an invoice. How's that?
Sure.
That's important.
I do have some question about first the computer hardware, like the chips. For instance, if I'm going to purchase a new laptop computer, like install Microsoft, so how do I make sure that all the patches applied to it? Do I need to just, is all the updates Windows released to cover those, you know, security weakness? Do I need to just double check if all the updates been installed to my computer or not?
Yes, for sure. So that's a good question. The way that Microsoft has kind of changed the way patching is done, Mike, probably near the end of last year. Before, users had the ability to kind of pick and choose what patches were applied, because oftentimes those patches would affect your system or programs running on it. They've changed the way that it's done now, so it's in these roll-ups, and they say, listen, as Microsoft, we're forcing everyone with our operating system to get all patches all the time, right? It's a security issue. So the answer is yes, right? Make sure that you're up to date. And the problem, though, is that, you know, when you look at what a managed service provider brings to the table, just because Windows says that it's up to date, you know, oftentimes there are pieces of that patch that have failed to deploy, right? So you want to make sure that you stay on top of that. Perhaps a patch is installed, but you haven't restarted your computer in a month, right? So those are things that an MSP can really monitor and make sure that not only are they downloaded and installed, but they're applied properly. So that is very important, but there is one more kind of level, right, to making sure that's executed well.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, right now, for instance, if I use Firefox or IE, I always browse through the private mode. Is it more secure, or is it just, you know, fake secure?
Yeah, so private mode is really just kind of hiding your activity on that computer, so it's not capturing locally where you've gone and browsed. But you have to remember that when you go somewhere on the internet, you are leaving your computer and you're going out, right, into the wild. So that data is still being captured by the other devices on your network, by your ISP, by the site that you're going to. It's really just a matter of what's happening on your machine locally.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And just to add to that, it basically anomalizes your activity when you're in that session. So while and it is local information where it's stored, so it's not tracking cookies, any other of that metadata that websites will use to say, hey, you've been here before. When you're in a private session, that's not kept on your local machine. So while they may see that, hey, you visited this site from this IP address, it's not going to remember any of that information. So there is a level of anonymity there or security if you're concerned about that, but then you lose a lot of conveniences with that as well. But from a security standpoint, you are gaining a little bit.
So as a growing company, we're looking to build out our IT infrastructure. And one of the decisions that we're talking about is, do we do locally hosted servers and hardware and file servers, or do we go with the cloud? From a security perspective, what are the pros and cons of using cloud-based hosting versus local-based hosting?
Great question. So we're seeing a generation of businesses, and it's spawned by SaaS applications, everything hosted in the cloud. And Windows 10 is kind of a cloud-first platform now where they're leveraging Azure AD in the cloud. If you're subscribed to Office 365 in any way, you have Active Directory in the cloud. So basically, you can treat your Windows 10 machine as a mobile device. And what that carries with it is a level of policy management, hardware management, app deployment management, just like you would on a phone. But where if you start to get into real granular need for control, the cloud option is not there yet. So the on-premise stuff with group policies and the security built around Active Directory, you can get real granular into locking down a machine based on the user who logs into. One user could log in and just have one icon on their desktop and access nothing else. The next user could log in and have full access to that desktop. Those policies right now are not available in cloud-based directory services. So depends on the need. If you see down the road that you're going to need to lock down your environment in particular fashion, you're going to kind of want to look to see, currently you're not going to be able to get there without an on-premise machine. But the on-premise machine will synchronize with the cloud directory services. So if you are looking to leverage a local identity management or directory services, you can still leverage that in the cloud for Office 365 or some of your other SaaS-based applications that integrate with Office or Azure. In this example, for directory services, and they partner with thousands of other SaaS-based organizations that can leverage your either on-prem or hosted for directory services and single sign-on authentication.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, this is a question that's been asked of me, so I don't know if it's more of either question, because all you guys talked at some point about phishing. So a question was asked of me. Maybe it's of interest to other people in the room, and then you guys can maybe elaborate, even if there's much to elaborate on. But just opening the email, does that expose you to a phishing attack, or do you have to go to a link, or do you have to open the document that I think Ryan talked about being embedded in the email?
Yeah, it varies. In most cases, action needs to be taken after that email has been opened. Right? It's the document inside of the email. It's the link in the email that sends you to a malicious location. what's great is that not all hope is lost, right? If you open up that email and you click on a link, perhaps you didn't pay attention to your training, which is very important. Maybe you didn't hover over the URL. Maybe you didn't run it through your AV scanner first. We come back to this idea of the firewalls, and now we've talked a lot about DNS filtering, and the purpose there is to say, listen, we know that the IP address this is going to is a known malicious site. So even though you clicked on it, we're going to stop you from getting to that location. Unfortunately, those bad malicious sites are active for only maybe minutes or hours at a time. So, partnering with a solution that's able to index basically the internet on a regular basis to find those sites is a part of kind of helping to mitigate that threat if you do take action on an email.
Yeah, and it's a multi-layer approach for protection. Like, to answer the question, like Ryan said, it does take an action typically, because there was a concern a while ago where with HTML emails, someone could embed a script in there, and when the browser in Outlook renders it, then it would activate it. That takes some sophistication there to pull those off, but you saw a lot of, when that was going on, you'd see a lot of organizations switch to text-based only email to remove that vulnerability or that threat. I haven't seen much of it recently in a while, but to counter that, what we're seeing now, and one of our partners is doing this. So you have layers of protection, right? You have DNS filtering, you have your local antivirus on your desktop, and you have spam filtering, right? So there's 3 layers there, but something still gets in. What they're doing now, and they're incorporating the training into this as well. So let's say that you get a phishing attempt and you fell for it, you clicked on it, your antivirus scanned it, saved the day, it automatically enrolls you in a security awareness training program because it saw that you clicked on that. So now you are alerted that, hey, you clicked on something, we're going to get you involved in this training, we'll go through it, and then that kicks off your security awareness training. And then you get tested on that every so often just to make sure you're up to date. So what's great about that is we talked about the people element of vulnerability and security and how training is necessary. Now we're getting to a point where it's automating that training based on your daily activities, which takes a lot of the management out of it, and gets everyone on the same page. So it's something to look forward to.
Questions? Maybe one more.
Kind of going to school on the Equifax, since you guys are in the industry. A lot of what I heard today, like on the best practices and insurance side, is damage control after the breach has occurred, things that from a corporate perspective, I guess Equifax would be doing. But for a user of, let's say, Equifax that has been harmed, those horror stories, what is Equifax or someone of that from that corporate side, what are they doing on behalf or for the protection of that harmed user?
So I'm actually going to let you address this question. I don't have the answer. I was just curious. How many people in this room froze their credit after they were affected by what happened at Equifax? 5 or so. That's actually more than I expected. A fun little tidbit, apparently only about 1% of people who were affected actually took action to freeze their credit. So that just goes to show you, again, people's level of risk. John, I'll let you address that.
Because it's a pain in the ass to freeze your credit and have to deal with that. It's just the truth. But yeah, Equifax it's going to be, I think, taught in like business schools for years, both from a not just on the cyber side, but kind of on the PR side, in terms of how not to handle an incident like that. From the initial kind of credit monitoring website kind of opt-in they set up that made it look like you were giving up your rights to sue Equifax if you opted into their credit monitoring and what have you. I mean, that's the bulk of my understanding as to what Equifax is doing for potentially impacted consumers is on the credit monitoring side. And then whether or not you then took the extra step to then freeze your credit after the fact. I think we will start to see soon the lawsuit start to come. When I first heard of the data breach, my initial thought was, well, Equifax is one of the world's largest repositories of Social Security numbers and other very sensitive personal information. And I initially, and despite being up here talking to you all, naively thought, well, I'm sure Equifax did everything. I'm sure Equifax hadn't intentionally or recklessly done anything wrong, and then you start to read the reports of, well, there was, software there was a Java vulnerability that had been unpatched for 2 months on their servers, and that's what allowed for the breach. And so if you are one of the world's largest repositories of Social Security numbers, you better damn well be sure that your software is up to date. And so you're going to start to see the lawsuits come from people that are classes of folks that have been impacted by the breach. Less known, and to give you less security about what Equifax is doing with your data, a lesser known breach happened around the same time in Equifax, Argentina. Has anybody heard about this? So Equifax, around the same time as the data breach here, Equifax's servers in Argentina were breached as well. And the breach in Argentina occurred because the network administrator for Equifax in Argentina left his login as admin, lowercase admin, and left the password as admin, lowercase admin. So that's what allowed for the breach in the Equifax breach in Argentina. So just to give you all a little bit less confidence in what Equifax is doing with your data moving forward, that's their attitude towards the security of your information, that their network administrator, albeit not here in another country, but didn't know enough about data security to know that he shouldn't leave the defaults as his login and password for his access to the servers that stored their customers' data.
So actually, I'm going to comment on that a little bit more. I think, as we said, it's impossible to have 100% protection. So even LastPass at some point was a breach. So if you look at the top 10 breaches, there's some pretty sophisticated companies that have the right minds behind them that have been breached. So it really starts with what our panel's been saying, which is, what is your risk tolerance, right? What information do you need to protect? I know you have to weigh the benefit of quick access for work processes, employees who need to do things quickly, with the benefit of having security. So I don't know if anyone else practices this way, but I have a ton of information on my laptop. And I know the policies are only put it on the network, right? But the reality is, I'm mobile, I move around, I need that information quickly. Shame on me. On the same token, what happens if I can't access it quickly? So I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. What is maybe the right thing to do is spend the time within your organization understanding your information. You shouldn't be saving everything. Everything doesn't have the same level of importance or criticality. What is truly important to your business? Where does it make sense to put the right controls? Educate your employees around why access for some things might take longer. So this instant gratification that has now made it the IT professionals' jobs really tough when within 20 minutes they haven't been able to resolve something. It really means everyone has to get on the same page with a true IT risk management policy that ties into record, data retention, information sharing. So that's my little input. Any other questions? So maybe we'll leave it with the panel. If you can each provide maybe one takeaway that you'd like everyone to leave today, understanding or knowing.
Again, this is redundant, but I think, as everybody has pointed out, you have to understand what your risk is, decide what your level of risk tolerance is. Everybody, one of the things I tell all my clients is I'm not going to tell you there is no right or wrong way to buy insurance. You have to decide what keeps you awake at night. So once you determine that, then take the appropriate course of action, whether it be through prevention, through security, or buy insurance, or a combination of two. But do something, take action in some regard.
At the sake of sounding redundant, I mean, this is, again, not an if but a when, and when you understand that it's a when, the breach question, you start to understand kind of what steps you need to take to put yourself in the best position to respond when the breach occurs. And my challenge to all of you, I think, as you leave here today, is we all tend in our businesses, I think, to be somewhat siloed. HR does its HR function, IT does its IT function, the insurance folks do the insurance function, the managers and supervisors do their function, the employees do theirs, the C-suite does its, and whatever. And you're not going to put together an appropriate cyber defense plan for your organization unless all of those pieces are communicating with each other, so they all understand the role they each have to play in establishing kind of your best defense against a cyber attack and putting you in the best position to appropriately and quickly respond when the breach occurs. So if your pieces and parts are siloed and not communicating, I would encourage you that your business in general will work better if that doesn't happen in any aspect of your business, but particularly important to today's topic, you will not be able to do any of what we're talking about today unless all of the various pieces and aspects of your organization are talking to each other to allow them all to work towards the common goal of kind of putting yourself in the best position to defend against and remedy these breaches when they occur.
So my takeaway is don't use your computers or your cell phones or the internet. No, in all honesty, I think that what we need to do collectively is kind of take control back. We talked about a lot of things today that are kind of scary, for a lack of better words, but you need to take action to, again, take that control back. So know that those three pillars, right, the technology, the people, the process, let's get those things lined up. I think, John, you had presented the people as kind of a first line of defense. For me, you guys are the last line of defense and need to be the most fierce. So when we line up all of these technologies and all these processes, if they should overlap in a way that a gap is created and someone has exploited those tools, and that Trojan horse, if you will, gets in, you're the soldiers that need to be prepared to respond and to react to make sure that you mitigate that risk as much as possible. So I would say the takeaway is take ownership, educate yourself, align yourself with the right people and resources to secure yourself and your business.
I'm going to give you a little bit of a checklist to take away, whether it's on your personal side or on the business side. It's just some fundamental things that anyone in tech is going to tell you to practice, and that would be one. Recently, I think it was Windows 7 and above. Microsoft went to security first posture versus open posture. So just make sure your devices have the patching turned on and the automatic updates turned on. Step one. Two, make sure you have a good multi-vector or threat endpoint protection antivirus software on there, and just make sure that's updated. It doesn't, I mean, having one is better than not having one. So, but the big names are big names for a reason. So, you can pick one on the private side. Obviously, on the corporate side, go with what makes sense with your organization. 3, don't operate on a daily basis with a elevated privilege account. So if you have, whether it's your personal machine or your work machine, don't run as an administrator day in and day out. If you need to install software or you need to make some changes, have a special account for that and use it when you need it. Don't run daily with it, because then that's just an open door. And whoever gets a hold of your machine has the keys because they have your active session. Next, always have 2 browsers on your machine. You might have a favorite, Chrome or Firefox or Edge or Safari, what have you, but those can get compromised in and of themselves or deteriorate over time for whatever reason. And if you don't have a second one to use, even though you can get on the internet, you can't do anything with it because the browser that you love and use only is compromised. Obviously the last thing would be backups, or one last thing is always have a copy of your data. If it's that critical to you that you're concerned about it, have a copy of it. And there's so many automated ones and cheap ones on the personal consumer side, and obviously on the corporate side, follow whatever your corporate policy is. If you don't know what that is, or you don't believe you have one, ask about it. And then finally, use common sense. Whenever I stress this, like on a support call or to someone when I'm training them, you're taught as a kid to look both ways before you cross the street, right? You don't just jump out in there, even though you know the risks involved in it. And the same thing now, especially looking through emails or going on to websites, or if something doesn't make sense for what you're doing in the context that you're doing it, take a step back. I mean, those 2 seconds aren't going to really impact your productivity, but they could if it's the wrong thing. So that's my takeaways.
And maybe I'll leave with one last thing too. I think what we've heard today is change is constant, and we have to continuously educate ourselves, which means continuously looking at what we're doing in any area of our business and continuously improve. Even at Warwick, we practice what we preach. We've partnered with an independent third party for our own assessment of our IT governance, our exposure, our vulnerabilities, so that we are constantly challenging the practices that we have in place, making sure that our clients are protected, that we don't become the Equifax to the extent that we can prevent that. So I would encourage you to reach out to experts, colleagues, get a different opinion. You have some great resources up here. They'd be willing to share some good thoughts offline. So with that, I think thank you for attendance. I do want to make sure that those who have won a parting gift don't go away empty-handed. So I'm going to read off, I've got 5 numbers. I think everyone's number starts with 9811. So we're going to ignore that. So I'm going to read off the last 2 digits. Number 79. Okay. You can go in the back right-hand corner. Number 80. Number 72. Number 85. Number 54. And 57. I like seeing people getting excited for a pen. No. I want to say thank you to everyone here who's participated. I want to give a special thanks to the people behind the scenes. We have Melissa Rosenberg from Rosenberg Advertising, who is partnering with us to help on all of our social media and information. She's been a great partner of ours. We also have Pam from AFP Marketing, who helps us with our video presentation, digital media. And then lastly, I just want to extend a thank you to everyone here who took the time through the inclement weather. I think, as mentioned before, for anyone who's participated today, we are offering a complimentary network assessment. That'll be provided to you via a link on our website. An email will be forthcoming that will provide that, as well as what we hope you'll take advantage of is some feedback on the information you learned today. We try to provide educational sessions with good partners, so your feedback in helping all of us deliver something that's meaningful is important. And a couple other goodies along in that email, such as a link to the video and some of the slides. So thanks again, and feel free to spend some time with our presenters or anyone else here.